Hello, today is November 28th, 2017. My name is Gregory James, and I'm a graduate student here at Salem State University in the Graduate History program. I have the great pleasure of being joined today by Szafir, who is a descendant of Mary Eastie. We are here today as part of the Salem State Witch Trials Descendant Oral History Project. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So it's about the last week in November. I know you've journeyed down from a long way up in Vermont. How was your drive down here today?
Fine. It was fine. Very nice sunny day today.
That's good. That's good to hear. I heard, when we were talking before the interview earlier, you'd said you kind of spent some time walking through Salem. Have you ever been to the city before?
I have. In fact, I would say maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I traveled here with my sister in the fall, and we wanted to look around, and we were in Topsfield, and we went to the library to do some ancestry research there. Mm-hmm. And we happened to be looking for land of where Marytown Eastie had in Topsfield, and we found that land. And while we were there, we wanted to pick up a rock from the land to bring home because we like to do that kind of a thing. And it ended up that someone from the town association was stopping by because there was going to be a dedication the very next day. And so they invited us, and we stayed at that dedication and met a lot of people in that organization, and I decided to join that. And that same day we went to Salem, and we had an idea of where Mary was taken to be hanged, and we found it behind the drugstore, my sister and I. There was nothing there at that time, and it happened to be exactly on the day that she was hung, and it wasn't planned, and it was a crazy coincidence.
Wow.
And it sort of brought chills up our spine when we found that out, but we found it and walked all around the area, and it was a really interesting and fascinating trip.
Well, that does sound incredible. The amazing coincidences of just kind of all of it. So the way the interview is going to kind of work is that we're just basically going to trace journey of your life from kind of your hometown to you growing up to you kind of discovering your ancestry and becoming more involved about that. So I'd like to just kind of start and kind of ask you about the town you were born in. I believe it was Lewiston, Maine.
I was born in Lewiston, Maine. That's where my grandparents lived.
Okay.
But I lived in Bath with my two parents and my three siblings. And that's where I grew up, in the same house my entire life.
Okay. So you were born in Lewiston, but didn't really spend a whole lot of time there.
No.
How long were you in Lewiston?
Well, we would only go up there to visit. Only when I was born there. We would go up to visit my grandparents there, my mother's parents, most every Sunday when I was a child.
Okay. So Lewiston is, I believe it's one of the largest cities in Maine, whereas Bath is kind of a much smaller town. How would you describe Bath kind of as a town, as a place growing up?
Well, it's along the Kennebec River, so there's a wide river there. A small town, close-knit. We all walked to school. We didn't take the bus, we walked many blocks to school. And everybody would know each other when you would be downtown. You couldn't do anything wrong because someone would find out, and they all knew who our parents were because my father was a principal and they were both teachers, and so it was a small, close-knit community. We went to church downtown, and the YMCA was downtown. We had a lot of activities. Very able to go and play and do what you want to do without any concerns. Very safe area. It's very nice. I love it. To this day, I have to be near a body of water. Now, I live near Burlington in Essex now, and there's a large lake there, and so I'm comfortable there. But if I had to live landlocked, it would be difficult.
So you said your father was a principal and your mother was a teacher. Was teaching a big occupation in the town? Was that kind of like the major occupation?
No, the major occupation was shipbuilding in our town.
Okay.
Bath Iron Works. It's
Oh,
a
okay.
very big company, and that's where most people worked. I mean, obviously, there were other jobs. My dad was a assistant principal. He also coached a lot of teams in the town, refereed a lot of games, and he also was a salesman all around New England. Knows all the best places to eat and all the back roads and all the shortcuts, too. So he went from teaching into sales.
Okay. What about your mother? What did she teach?
She was a home economics teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, good cook, and she could sew or paint or do carpentry or you name it. If she put her mind to it, she could accomplish it.
What would you say is the regional identity of the people who lived there?
I'm not sure what you mean by that question.
So basically, what I'm asking is, what would you say is like kind of what were like the major like ethnic groups, ethnicities? Were people like mainly Irish, Polish? Did that really play a role in people's identity there?
I never really noticed anything
Okay.
at all. Isn't that interesting? I just never. It obviously must have all been pretty much the same because I never saw anything that stood out much at all.
Okay. Is your family originally from Maine? Have they kind of always lived there as far as you know?
Yeah, my mom was born in Maine and my dad was born in Maine, northern Maine.
Okay.
Rustic County.
Okay. Do you have any? Well, obviously you have a sister. Do you have any other siblings?
I have two brothers. One is living in Connecticut, David, and Michael lives in Durham, New Hampshire. And my sister lives in Scarborough, Maine.
What do they do for a living, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
My oldest brother is a nurse in a VA hospital. He's one of the nurses that directs other nurses in the hospital.
Okay.
And he was a teacher before that time. And my other brother is in sales, and my sister has been a teacher.
Okay. Did you have any other? So other than your grandparents, did you have any other kind of relatives you spent a lot of close contact with when you were growing up?
Just my aunt and uncle, who are living in Vermont now, and my grandparents. We didn't make it up to Aroostook County that often to see my dad's family.
Okay. So you attended Morse High School. Sorry.
Right.
In Bath. How would you describe your high school experience there?
It was. I personally didn't really like high school very much, but there was a lot of cliques and things going on, and I never seemed to be part of it. I was more into sports and did that kind of a thing. So I was more than happy to graduate and move on to college, to be honest. It was a fairly small high school. I think we probably had approximately 200 kids in my class, not that large.
Okay, so after high school, did you go straight into college, or did you take some time off to work?
No, I had been working in high school. I worked at a bank, a Bath Savings Institution. I was a teller, the window teller there. I also worked at Friendly's as a waitress. And then when I went to college, I also was a lifeguard, and I worked for an accountant and went directly into college there. But it was just a 2-year college, junior college.
Okay, and what caused you to kind of settle on Bay Path Junior College?
Well, one of the things I excelled at in high school was administrative type business work, and so that's what I decided to go into.
Okay. So is that what you've kind of remained in for?
Yes, although I'm retired now, but I've always, oftentimes I've worked for a unit of 60 people and taken care of all their administrative types of needs, travel and typing and shorthand and all those types of things, and billing and so forth. So I've worked at several different organizations for presidents, vice presidents. I worked in Boston. I've worked in Montpelier, Vermont, and where I am now, but I'm retired now.
Of the jobs you had, what would you say was kind of your favorite, your best experience?
Well, I really liked working at Payne Weber Properties in Boston. I enjoyed that job a lot. They would buy shopping centers and properties across the country, and then we'd put packets together to investors and things like that. So I like that job. And I was the first one to bring in computers into that job. And I had no idea how they were going to work, but I didn't let them know that. And so I managed to figure it out and then train them on them. So that was a fun job.
It definitely sounds it. Sounds
It was
terrific.
satisfying. Yeah.
So I guess we'll just transition a little bit. Since you've retired, since you've retired, and what have you been up to? Have you taken up any other jobs or any other hobbies?
Well, I started doing the ancestry, which I absolutely love, and if I had my life to do over, I would probably be a genealogist. But lately, I haven't had a whole lot of time to work on that because my parents are getting older, and we've been doing a lot of elder care with my mom, and she's passed away now, and now my dad, he's 91. And so we're doing a lot of elder care there. So it's a lot of back and forth between Vermont and here. Because he's now in Scarborough, but he was in Brunswick.
What kind of prompted you to try and learn more about your ancestry?
It all comes from my mom. My mom delved into this when we were older teenagers. She would go from town to town and do research and try to find out the owner of the house. We lived in an old 1700s house in Bath, and she wanted to find out the ownership, and then she started working on our family tree. So she would do it, but it was very time consuming and a lot of travel involved to just get details and to recheck details. So she had hoped that we would take an interest, and at the time we were young and we really didn't. But I've really gotten into genealogy.
Now on these, you say your mom had to travel quite a bit for this. Would she ever take you and your siblings with her when she did this, or was she just kind of going it alone?
Sometimes she did, but not very often.
Not very often. So it seems like she was kind of very interested in learning more about kind of the history of her home, things in her life. Did she ever delve into like more of her kind of own personal family ancestry? Or
Yes,
okay.
yes, she did. She didn't get very far because her father was adopted, and so because her grandparents died young in the flu epidemic in the Boston area, so she had a little difficulty here and there getting very far. So she gleaned what she could from relatives. And so it was bits and pieces, and that's what helped me take off.
Okay, so your mom seems like a big influence in your push into searching for your own ancestry and your interest in genealogy. So how much time would you say you've kind of spent in your own research on your own ancestry in this topic?
Hours and hours and days and months. It's hard to put all together, I don't know, because unfortunately I do it so piecemeal, a little bit, and it's like, oh, if I could do anything, I'd push it all aside and just do that, but I can't. So I don't know, maybe a total of 6 months, if you did it solid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's a considerable amount of time for kind of any personal pursuit. So how are you related to Mary Eastie?
Well, I am related through my father's side.
Okay.
So Mary Eastie was married to Isaac. They had a child, Isaac. That Isaac actually is shocking to me that he stayed in this area and had his children, because I would have thought that the stain on the reputation would have been rough to deal with. And then he had a child, I believe, Richard. And Richard, I believe, is the one that ended up going up to Maugerville area in Nova Scotia and settling there and having children. I believe he had a child named Zebulon, and Zebulon had Dolly, and Dolly had Bernice, which is my great-great-grandmother, and then Bernice had Glenna, and Glenna had my dad, and Dad had me. So I think it's interesting. She's my 8th great-grandmother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did her name ever come up in your childhood, either through your mother's own kind of family research, or kind of any stories from your father or your father's family?
No, sadly, no. I wish. No. No, she never got that far. And she was more interested in her, she was doing mostly her side. I think she was struggling with her side. Hmm.
Okay. Is there anything that you find particularly interesting about Mary Eastie's life, either her experience of the trials, or is there something else that stands out about her to you? What kind of drew you to her?
Well, I just think it's the whole turmoil of it, the whole emotional being tried for something that you didn't do, and it was just all made up. I just think about her saying goodbye to her family, and how did her family just stand by and let it happen without, I mean, obviously I know there were so many pressures on them. I mean, you did what the minister told you to do, and that was the way it was, or you were going to be named possibly, you know. But it's just her strength. Her strength must have been immense, absolutely immense. And I believe she helped write some pleas to the powers that be to, you know, stop this, and that really helped the others not go through this. And so I think she was a pretty brave woman with unbelievable amounts of courage to face her death like that, saying she knows that my hour is coming and I have to die, but to not, you know, to look into this because it's not right. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And for those times, for a woman.
Definitely. Would you now her two sisters, Rebecca Nurse and believe it's Mary Cloyce, were also tried and found guilty and executed. Do you think that her kind of family connection to these women is what kind of, at least in part, prompted her own accusation?
Well, you know, it's hard to say. There were so many things going on. I mean, there were the attacks in Falmouth and Scarborough and York, and that's one factor. And there's greed about who has what land and whose cows are traveling over the marker onto somebody else's land, and disputes and amongst the people. And I believe that, I think as Reverend Paris, you know, he was upset because people weren't paying him his salary, and he wanted to have a salary. I mean, I think there's so many different aspects to all of it. And then there's gossip, and then, you know, well, if she's doing it, she must be doing it. And I just think it was a perfect storm. It was a perfect storm in that time for this to happen the way it did.
Yeah. So you seem fairly knowledgeable about the Salem witch trials, about the events that happened in them. When did you remember kind of first hearing about them? If we can transition kind of back maybe to your childhood.
I can't really say that I knew that much. Certainly nothing specific, but I just think I knew there was a connection to the witch trials in Salem, but nothing specific at all.
Okay.
Really. And by the way, on my mother's side, Mary Ayer Parker was also hung, and she is my 9th great aunt. So on my father's and my mother's side, on the same day, they were hung.
Oh, wow, okay.
So it's pretty crazy.
So you're connected to the trials in kind of at least two ways that you're aware of. And that's very incredible. So you didn't, so kind of growing up, you didn't really kind of hear much about the Salem witch trials. They weren't a big.
No, we never really covered it in school, but I remember, you know, hearing about it. But that's it, really.
Okay. Did your interest in kind of the period, does that all kind of spring from the knowledge of your ancestry, or was that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Once I learned that, I wanted to, you know, find out more, read more, and
just kind of took you deeper and deeper down into the rabbit hole, so to speak. What do you know about Mary Eastie's life kind of before and during the trials, kind of like before the actual like execution?
Before the accusation or after the accusation?
Before the accusation.
I assume she was a farmer's wife and, you know, did took care of the kids, and although they were older at that time, because I think she was 58 when she died, and probably just took care of her husband and probably the livestock, and did those sort of chores and went to church on Sunday. I would think that would be pretty much most of her life. Probably made candles and butter and bread and all those things.
All right. So kind of transitioning back to the trials themselves, you mentioned a lot of kind of issues going on, issues around property and land, gossip, jealousy. What do you feel were kind of the causes behind the outbreak of the witch trials in general, not just specific to Mary Eastie's accusation?
Well, I think there were diseases coming off the ships. There were the Indian attacks that was creating fear. And I think one of the Percy children was one of the ones in Falmouth where they came in and killed the family, and she was the lone survivor, so she was probably traumatized from that. And if she's back here in Salem and she's hearing about more of this, she might have been re-traumatized, I don't know, and maybe other girls were listening to these stories being told by parents when they shouldn't have been, and they might have been hysterical about that. I think obviously there were probably some people in the community that had more than other people, and they didn't really like that, whether it was more land or better land with good water on it, or more fertile land, or things like that. I think there could have been maybe a crop had some sort of disease to it. Maybe they ate that and got hysterical. Maybe people had seizures, but they didn't know what they were at that time. Could be all kinds of things. Plus, I think that the minister held quite a bit of power over people. And if you didn't do what he said, then you were in trouble. It's kind of funny because they came over here to have freedom, and then they're sort of held captive by the minister, what he says. So those are some things, I think.
A lot of the kind of subsequent kind of historiography about the witch trials is kind of focused on quite a bit on the afflicted girls themselves, and kind of examining whether whether this was kind of these were sincere accusations, or if this was all just kind of a made-up game. Where would you say, knowing what you know about the trials, where would you say you fall in regards to that debate? Were they making it up, or do you feel that they were kind of truly afflicted by something and were just finding an outlet?
That's a tough one, and I think about that. Those girls were getting a lot of attention, and other girls may have wanted to have that attention too and be part of the limelight of all of that. And they could have been told to perhaps behave that way, because it keeps the minister right in the limelight of having his authority. So it's tough to think that so many girls would be behaving like that. And if it was in the food, why wouldn't the other people be behaving like that? So it's a real conundrum. But I kind of think that it might have been made up. But I wish they had called better doctors in or somebody else in. I don't know how many doctors came because I haven't followed up on any of that. But it seems to me like that would have been a good idea. And why wasn't everybody behaving like that, or more people? Why was it just a certain few?
So kind of transitioning back to kind of yourself and your own journey and kind of discovering your ancestry. Have you ever outside of your own family, have you ever spoken with any other descendants from the witch trials, either people who were afflicted or people who were accused, such as like the relatives of Mary Eastie's sisters? Have you spoken with anyone?
No.
No?
No. I mean, I only was briefly at that park dedication, so I really didn't speak, I was just getting into it, so I didn't really have a chance to talk with anyone.
Okay. So with the witch trials and kind of everything that happened and kind of Mary Eastie's own experience during them, do you feel that there's any kind of lesson to be gained from studying the witch trials or studying these individuals such as Mary Eastie?
Well, by studying them, it gives you a window into history at that moment in time, of what was really happening, the influence that the elders had or the minister had over the people. It's interesting that they came here for freedom, and yet they're sort of held captive there, and they can't say anything in defense of innocent people that are going to be killed because they're being held captive by their religion or what their minister says is happening. As far as a lesson, isn't it always ongoing? I mean, people are always greedy and want power, and you know, you have to stand up and say something. You know, you have to take that risk. And if they had done it as a collective group, I think things could have been different. And everyone was scared to step forward. So I guess that's the lesson.
All right. So in regards to your own kind of personal identity, has discovering your ancestry to this woman that you hold in such kind of high regard for her courage, has that kind of changed your own personal identity in any way? Has that influenced you in any way with how you kind of conduct yourself in your daily life?
Well, I think in hard situations, you know, it makes you think. You know, you've got some hardy stock behind you, and you know, it's okay. You can step up and do whatever needs to be done. So yeah, I think so.
It's good to hear. And have you uncovered any other people you would deem significant, any other significant relatives in your family research?
I'm related to William Brewster on the Mayflower. He was one of my grandfathers. I can't tell you the number because it's not in my head, but yes, so I'm related to him. Related to some of the wives of King Henry.
Okay.
So yeah, it's interesting. As I said, I would like to spend every minute of every day on it, but I just can't do that right now. But yes, it's really interesting and fun to do genealogy and look back and find out who your people are.
What was the test or service you used to conduct your ancestry?
Ancestry.com.
Ancestry.com. So that kind of goes through kind of available public records and other family documents. Have you ever considered you know, kind of did you ever look into any other services such as like
Fold 3 and newspapers.com too.
Okay, there's also a lot of kind of recent developments in that field, such as like 23andMe, which I believe is
I've done it.
You've done it.
I've done it, yes. And I've done the DNA test on Ancestry as well.
Oh, okay. Did those yield any kind of interesting
I
things?
haven't spent that much time with that yet, but certainly people have reached out to me that are relatives, yes. Yeah. I haven't, the 23andMe test, well, I guess thankfully hasn't shown any issues medically, so that's good. I guess we come from a hardy stock, and people from overseas have reached out, and some people in New England have too, to me, so that's interesting to find cousins and relatives you didn't know you had.
Widening a family that you weren't really
Right.
terribly aware about. No, it sounds very interesting. Is there anything else about maybe Mary Eastie or yourself, or kind of your experience with ancestry and genealogy that you'd like to mention?
No, but I recommend people do it because I think you'll find a lifelong hobby. I do. But nothing as far as any other individuals. I mean, it's interesting historically to learn about different relatives, and you might be surprised about stories that you find about them that are in old books and so forth. I mean, some of my ancestors have been scalped and have been in Indian attacks and things like that, and it really brings history alive. I will say history has become much more alive for me than it ever did when I was younger and in school, so through this.
Well, that all sounds great. It definitely makes me want to try and kind of discover my own ancestry. But I think that kind of concludes our interview for today. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. I
Thank you.
really appreciate you taking the time today to come and sit with us.
Thank you.